Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, it's part 7 of our Toys and Joys 1948 Woodie Wagon build. Well, when we finished up last week at part 6, we had just gotten the entire back assembly and panels all glued together and a dry fit on the actual body of the vehicle. We still have the back of that section to do, but let's head over to the plans and see where we're going to go next with this build. Well, the next pieces that we're going to work on will be these uprights, and the only reason I'm doing them now is because I get the feeling that they're going to get forgotten if we don't do them at this point. Guys, it's a very simple 1/8 by 1/8 inch piece. I cut it using my grippers over at the table saw and then cut it to length using the small parts cutting jig at the table saw. Now, there's really no dimensions on the plans as far as anywhere that these go, but if you scale off right here and as well right here, you will soon discover that there is 1.5 inches between this back up right here and our little 1/8 by 1/8 inch piece. And from this second up right here back towards the rear of the vehicle, there is a 2-inch gap. So we can very easily just use some setup blocks, put these in place, put a little bit of glue at each end, and line them up. Our setup blocks will pretty much make them square, but you want to check because it's small details like this that really stick out if they're a little bit off. And there you go. If you take your time and put these in slowly and double check them and that sort of thing, they end up looking really great. So the next piece I want to make would be this dashboard assembly. And guys, it's at this point that I realize I've got a serious problem with this model. And what it is right here on this dashboard body, I can see on each side a 3/16 of an inch overhang on each side. And that overhang sits right inside here, right here on this top lip where our framework here meets the main panels of our sides. So I don't have 3/16 of an inch there. I don't get it. I measured here. Yeah, I got 1/2 inch. I've got that for the bottom section, but those rabbits are not going to fit there. And I was a little confused. And then I looked at the main length here. And if we look at the main length, it's 4 5/8 of an inch. And when I measure across here, I don't have that. I have 4 3/8. So I am missing a fair bit of dimension. So, of course, the first thing I thought, well, maybe the dimensions are wrong on the plans, but I had to look at it and no, they're not. So I went all the way back to the very beginning of our build, and I see here that the main panels that I've made of cherry are 3/8 of an inch thick. And I don't know what I was thinking or what happened. If I was anxious to start the build, I don't know what happened, but I made my panels on the sides out of 1/4 inch thick. That means that each panel essentially is 1/8 of an inch too thin. So essentially my model, the whole model across the whole thing is now 1/4 of an inch too narrow. That causes a few problems. For starters, it kind of puts the sides flush with this edge of the cowl here from our hood assembly. That's okay, I can deal with that. I can fix that up. But what it's also going to mean is that from here on in, every single measurement that I do that has anything to do with the width of the truck, the back panels here, the roof, the dashboard, all of this, it's all going to be wrong. I have to custom fabricate every single piece from here on in. There's only one way around that, and that is to take all of this and scrap it. And I'm not willing to do that. I've got way too many hours here. So now we're in recovery mode. So it just, I guess, goes to illustrate that no matter how good you are or how good you think you are, mistakes can happen, and a major mistake has happened here. 100% my fault, nobody to blame but myself. So from here on in, if I mention measurements, I wouldn't pay too much attention to them. I would pay more attention to the methods that I'm showing you, because the measurements from here on in are going to be a custom job, because now I have to go into panic recovery mode and try to salvage everything I have here. So we are still going to start off with this dashboard piece that's 4 5/8 of an inch in this scenario, but mine is a little different. Mine is going to be 4 3/8 long. So, and instead of this 3/16 of an inch rabbet on each end, I have a 1/16 rabbet. So let me get that cut, and then we'll move on from there. I'm not going to cry over spilt milk. Let's move on and get this done. We can recover from this. And there we go. There is our dashboard body. Now, guys, we are not out of the woods for this disaster just yet. There's a lot more to go on this piece. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to make this dashboard trim. And this looks like a tricky piece, and it can be if you don't pay attention. So what I have done is I have milled a piece of stock, and this is 7/8 of an inch wide, and it is 5/8 of an inch thick. Now this is the overall dimensions of our dashboard trim. It is majorly long for what we need, and that's fine. I really don't feel like getting my fingers in close for a small little piece. So on the end, I have marked our shape here, and this shape is 1/8 of an inch in from each edge essentially. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to the table saw, and I'm going to cut this rabbet. However, I am only going to cut it to about back here. I'm not actually going to pop it out for the whole length. I want to keep the length intact. We only really need 1 3/16 off the end, so anything beyond that is just wasted anyway. So we're just going to cut that just a little bit in from the end. And at this point, you should have something that looks like this. So we have plenty here on the end for this to be our overlay piece. Now, if we look at the drawing here, we can see that we have a little bit of a rabbet on each one of these top sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark that out right here on the top surface of our blank, and we're just going to take this over to the scroll saw and cut those little itty bitty rabbets out. And at this point, the top should look like this. You can see where I've cut out our little rabbet all the way along. I've used a number 7 reverse tooth blade for this, by the way, guys. So the last thing to do here is we're going to take this over to the table saw, and we're going to cut this to its final length of 1 3/16 of an inch. Well, there is a little bit of shaping to do on this piece. We can see some slight curves here around the top edges. Guys, that is just some simple shaping by hand with some sandpaper and a block of MDF. Now you can do this just by hand and sandpaper if you want, just to get that rounded edge. But either way, just shape all your pieces, get your roundovers on there, soften these edges, and then I'll show you what to do next. And you should end up with something that looks just like this. Now guys, the next pieces we want to make here will be these dashboard panels. We need a right and a left. It's a pretty simple piece at 7/16 of an inch wide and 1 7/16 long. It's 1/8 of an inch thick. And this end angle here, although it gives you dimensions at the top of 1 3/8 and 1 7/16, I've measured those to be 9 degrees. So guys, all I did was on a longer piece, cut that 9-degree angle on each end, then cut them to length. And those, the radius here that you see of 1/16, I used a 1/8 inch circle template, marked it out, and just used hand sanding to shape it. And then these will get glued together something like this. It's a little crooked right now, but there you go, something like that. So we're going to glue these together, and then we need to make these little dowels. Now I want to do something a little different here. So I think I'm going to add just a little bit of laser embellishing to this. So I'm going to get that done. I don't think we need a video of it because it'd be a whole tutorial on how to do that sort of thing. But if you don't want to use laser embellishments here, all you need to do is cut a 3/8 dowel in a 1/8 inch slice and glue it in place where it shows right up here on the plans. Well, before I get too much into the embellishments that I want to put on this dash, I'm going to have to glue this thing together as much as I don't want to, and I don't like gluing it up this early. I like having the sections separate so that I can, you know, have better access as I'm building and do more dry fits. Gluing it in now is a very permanent solution, but the problem here is that because I messed up and the panels are the wrong thickness, things are shifting as I'm trying to test fit things. So I really need this solidified and locked down in order to get these custom pieces made. So I'm going to glue this together and let it set up. I'm going to glue the hood in place to make sure that I can also make the custom pieces I need to do there. One small mistake, guys, from 3/8 to 1/4 of an inch thick, finding out this late in the build, you can see how many problems it causes down the line. So I'm going to get this glued together, what I have so far, but while I'm waiting for the glue to dry, I guess I'm going to move on and continue with our dashboard. Well, what I have done is on some 1/8 inch maple, I have engraved these tiny little embellishments. This one is a clock, and then I have a speedometer as well. And in a chunk of walnut, in this case, I drilled a 3/8 diameter hole that is 1/8 of an inch deep, and then I used a plug cutter 1/2 an inch to cut around the outside. Now this one is off center, so I didn't use that, but this one here was centered, and that's fine. So from there, I glued my laser embellishment in there and then took it over to the table saw, set my fence at 1/8 of an inch, and just ran this through. And that ends up shearing off your embellishment. And this is what we end up with. So I'm going to give this a little bit of light hand sanding, and then we can glue it in place in our dashboard. And when you get that done, you end up with something like this. Now, I accidentally broke this one, but it was too late to do anything about it. It's already glued in place. So unfortunately, that's going to have to stay like that, but it's inside the cab, and you really won't be able to see it once it's in place inside. I know it's there though. So we're going to take this, glue it inside, right in the front here on top of our front end of our cab assembly, and we can just let that dry up. Okay, so I have the back of our vehicle glued together, and you can see I have my dials in place as well as my dashboard. And I have checked this all. Now guys, this is the part that I hate to bring up, but I don't want to make this build seem like it's plagued with problems, but we've already got this problem here with this cherry panel being 1/8 of an inch too thin. We're going to deal with that as we go by making custom dimensions. But I have to point this out because as I went to glue the hood on, I just want to show you something here. And if I place a square here, I have this raised up off of this flat surface. We've got a problem here. And the problem is that this cowl here is not square. As well, if I go on the other side, this one, I don't know if you're seeing it, but it's not square the other way. So it's doing this. And that is nothing but user error, 100% my fault. I didn't check with the glue up. I didn't check with the dry fit well enough to make sure that everything fits. So we have another problem here. This is not going to glue up properly to the body of our Woody. Because what's going to happen is now we're going to have gaps, and we're not going to have that seamless fit between the cowl and these front panels here. So I need to fix this. So I guess with these errors or these mistakes on my part, 100% on my part, it's going to give me the opportunity to show you guys how we're going to fix this. So what I've done is I've used my Incra T rule, and right across the side, the top here of this dashboard top, or I think this is the windshield bottom, I think it calls it. What we're going to do is I've placed a line right across here, 1/16 of an inch in from the edge. We're going to take this over to the belt sander. I have this supported on some blocks to keep it nice and secure and raised up off the table. I don't want to assume that this is a square edge to this. I know that it has to be square to this, which is where it mounts on the main body of our vehicle. So I'm going to hold this in place. I'm going to check my belt sander for square, and I'm ever so carefully going to remove a little bit of material at a time until I get this whole edge here squared up. At that point, we're going to do a dry fit, make sure everything looks good, and hopefully, if all goes well, that 1/16 of an inch is not going to make too much of a difference when it comes to the wheel wells being centered with our axles and that sort of thing. If there is, then I can always add a 1/16 inch piece around the outside here, around the cowls and the top here at the base of our windshield. So let's get this sanded up and see if we can't recover from this, because I would really hate to have to scrap this at this point in time. Okay, and truth be told, I didn't even get up to my line at 1/16 of an inch. I only took off about 1/32, and that was enough to allow me to straighten things up. And there we go. So we're good on this side now against the panel, and I'll just turn it around, and you can see that we're good on this side as well as being good here at the beginning of our dashboard. So guys, I guess what this illustrates is that not everything is perfect. Not everybody is perfect. We all make mistakes. Don't panic if you get into a situation like this. There's almost always a way to fix it, and you just need to think about, for starters, what is wrong. So when I looked at this and it wasn't fitting properly, I could see that the cowls here were wrong and that they had shifted and something was crooked. But you have to think now, where do they need to align to? And what they need to be is square to this bottom surface here that mounts flush on here. So that's why we raised it up and used our belt sander after squaring it up to get a good, clean, square edge. So don't panic if your model's a little off. It happens to the best of us. Just carry on. And honestly, that 1/32 that I had to trim out of there, I really don't think that's going to change too much. It looks like my axles are still pretty much centered here on our wheel wells, so I think I'm okay. I do have a little bit of an overhang here now at the front, about the same amount that I took off from the back, 1/32, but I'm not too concerned, because there is a whole front grille assembly that's going to be installed and placed here, and that will basically cover up or take out any imperfections. And essentially no one will ever know, other than, well, the people that watch this video. So now we can carry on. Let's get this hood glued in place so that we can start making some of the other pieces that we need to make. Well, while we're waiting for that hood assembly to dry on our chassis, I want to move on to page 7. And what that's going to be is this entire rear panel, or the rear body for the vehicle. Now, guys, this is pretty much exactly the same as doing the side panels. It starts off with a panel right here, the rear body, which is 1/8 of an inch thick. That is the basis for everything. And then we can see here in the assembly, it pretty much gives us the layout of where all of the strips go. We are going to use that same 45 chamfer bit to be able to profile these as needed, as they show on the plans here. And as well, where needed, we will also use that 1/16 inch router bit, the straight bit, to give extra little details. Now, one thing I will not be adding will be these 3/32 of an inch dowel. The reason being, guys, honestly, I don't like them. And if you don't like them, why would you add them to your model? So for me, I'm going to be eliminating those because I honestly don't think they add anything to the model. And if anything, I think it's going to take away from the model. So I'm going to carry on, get all of these pieces glued on with the rear panels. If I come across anything that is out of the ordinary or anything that I might need to bring to your attention, then obviously, yes, I will come back and update that. But for now, I will carry on with gluing these pieces carefully in place, and I will see you at the end when I get this done. Well, one thing that I will point out here is that this centerpiece here. If we look on the drawing, we can see that we have a spare tire mount. Guys, this is nothing more than a piece of 1/4 inch diameter dowel. But what I've done on the plans, it shows it surface mounted. So essentially, when I make that piece, instead of it being this 3/8 of an inch long that it states, we're going to make it a 1/2 an inch long because I have drilled a hole here in that center piece. And the reason for that is I think it'll give a lot more support for that spare tire. Just because Toys and Joys says to surface mount it, you don't have to necessarily do that. So anyway, that is the one change I made. I also had to make this thinner. This is not 3/4 of an inch. This is 1/2 an inch. Because of my messed up panels, this whole back panel here is no longer 5 inches. Mine's actually 4 3/4. So to cause me the least amount of grief, I reduced this here by 1/8 of an inch on each side, and that way all of the rest of the dimensions would be the same, and I would have to change as little as possible. So a little customizing on my panel, but that's my own darn fault. So, okay, we're going to get this glued together, and then we're going to move on to the rear window frame. And it doesn't take long before you get this glued up. And as I stated, there was a lot of customizing of the measurements to get this to fit due to my own errors. But I now want to get this top rear window frame. Now guys, there's all kinds of stuff here. There's no angles listed. There's just dimensions. But I can tell you, I've kind of done some measuring, and I'll save you a bunch of hassle and tell you that I've cut all of these angles, all of them, for that back rear window panel or the frame at 17 degrees, and they all seem to fit pretty well. But we do have right here this 16-inch radius, and honestly, what I think I'm going to do with that in order to make my life just a little bit easier is, guys, I'm just going to glue this back frame together, and then when I mount it, I'm going to glue it in here, and it's going to actually sit a little bit proud of this back frame. And we're just going to use our shop-made sanding block and sand that all flush to get it all leveled out and evened out. It's really not rocket science, guys. It's a rip cut along at 17 degrees to get the top and the bottom. These side pieces are cut out of different dimension stock, but again, 17 degrees just using the miter fence. We're going to get this glued up, and we're going to do a dry fit. So let me get that point done, but there is one more piece that we need to make before we can put this window in or glue in this back rear panel. Okay, and there we go with the dry fit. Now, I haven't glued any of this in, obviously. That's why it's a dry fit. And therefore, I also have not shaped this curve. That's okay. We can do that after. But the next piece that we want to make goes right in here, and this is the rear window support. And guys, this thing hurts my head. I honestly, no matter how much I stare at this, I don't get it. There is all kinds of weird angles here. This angle here is not 90. This one's not 90. This one is not 90. This one is not 90. So why is this so complicated? I don't understand, and I also don't understand its function. So the more I think about it, as I've said many times with these models, for me, it's the problem solving that I enjoy more so than the actual making of the model. And what I have here is an offcut of our side trim. This is the trim that goes right here along our doors. It's nothing special, but I've added an extra chamfer to it. And if we just take this and place it right in here, just like this, look at that. That looks amazing. That looks fantastic. I didn't mess around with any angles. And honestly, the curve of this piece coming up at the top, that 90 degree, and then it meets with that 17 degree angle as this is angled in. Even on the inside here now, these are flush. There's no gap in there. So I don't understand how it is that this was necessary to make all these weird angles. We can see it in here, how well it fits in the back of the vehicle that with no gaps or what have you. So I'm not going to make it like Toys and Joys wants to make it here. I'm going to make it like Kenny at A Cut Above Woodworking wants to make it, and this is what I'm doing. It's going to make life for me a lot easier, and I would suggest, if that is the sort of thing that interests you, that you can do that for yourself as well. Okay, so I'm going to deal with this after. We need to get these panels glued in, but just, you don't need a video of me gluing in the panels. But what I do want to add is the running boards, and they go right along here. Now guys, I have looked all over these plans. The running boards are shown in many different areas of the plans, from general views to several other pages. And it has given the thickness of it, which we've known from the beginning, as 1/8 of an inch. We also know that it has a chamfer on it. We also know the length of it that we can see here in this, but nowhere does it show us how wide. So we can scale off of right here. We know that it sits flush with our cherry panel. And if we see right here on the drawing, we can scale that off right there. And that is 1/2 inch wide. And we have chamfered that. And these running boards will now get glued in place right there, just like that. So we'll get those ones glued in as well. And unfortunately, once again, that's all the time that we have for this week. Guys, this is a time-consuming process, and we've run into some real obstacles here in this episode with those side cherry panels initially being messed up and being made too thin from what they should have been. And then as well, that shifted glue up in those front cowls just behind the front fenders. But what we can take away from that is not just that I'm a screw up, but what we can take away from that is not to lose faith, not to lose our confidence. And when something like that happens, I didn't just throw in the towel and say, well, forget it, this is done, this is ridiculous, throw those fenders in the trash. No, I sat back, looked at it, analyzed the problem, and then came up with a safe solution that really didn't change the model that much. And because it didn't change the model that much, other than watching this series, when this whole thing is said and done, it doesn't matter who looks at it, they're not going to be able to tell that those panels are the wrong thickness. They're not going to be able to tell that those cowls behind the fenders were once all wonky. They're not going to be able to tell any of that. They're sure as heck not going to be able to tell that that bottom window support isn't done like the plans. What they're going to look at and what they're going to see is a final finished product that both I'm happy with and that they can enjoy to look at and I enjoy to look at. So that's what we have to take away from this, not the mess up. It's how we go about dealing with the mess ups, not that we never make them. Show me a woodworker, I've said this before, but show me a woodworker that says he never made a mistake, and I will show you a liar. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the content. If you haven't already, or if you found any part of this entertaining or informative, you know what, why not like and subscribe to the channel? We have an absolutely amazing audience base, and I'm hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of that. Guys, I want to thank you for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the part 7 of this series. We're going to move on with part 8 next Friday. Hopefully you're going to join me for that. I hope that you're trying this at home, that you're going to get yourself a set of these plans. The link is down below. I hope you're going to build along with me and not make the mistakes that I've made. But more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.